President Steinmeier, Secretary General Guterres, Dr. Tedros, distinguished guests, I'm honored to be a patron of this year's World Health Summit. And I'm delighted to be able to speak to you today, even if I wish it could be in person. Last year's edition, with more than 2,500 participants and 300 speakers from 100 nations, feels very difficult to imagine only 12 months on. This event has long reflected the global and interconnected nature of health in the 21st century. And looking back now, this is something I perhaps had not fully grasped as a student when I saw medicine primarily through a scientific lens. And while I started to understand it more as a doctor in obstetrics and gynecology, the nature of my work was still very narrowly focused on the clinical and the individual. It is important, but it was only later, when working at the Department of Epidemiology at the Hanover Medical School, that I really learned what global health meant. And there's one story from the time, the story of an epidemiologist, that I think illustrates this better than I could explain. It was back in February and March 2003, just as I was moving from medicine to become state minister with responsibility for health, amongst other things. At the exact same time, on the other side of the world, a SARS superspreading event was taking place on the 9th floor of the Metropole Hotel in Hong Kong. And within days, the virus had spread as far as Singapore, Canada, and Vietnam. And it was in Hanoi that Dr. Carlo Urbani, an infectious disease specialist, was working for the WHO. Here was an Italian doctor working in a French hospital in Vietnam, treating an American patient who himself had fallen sick in Hong Kong. He recognized at first that this was a SARS-like respiratory disease, and he was the first to trigger the alarm. And in doing so, he saved countless lives everywhere from Thailand to Toronto, and probably far beyond. I mention this story firstly to pay tribute to Dr. Urbani, who, as many of you will know, became infected shortly afterwards and sadly passed away, leaving a young family behind. But also to illustrate how linked our health is and how important global cooperation is. More than at any point in human history, the health of one country directly affects that of another. And cross-border viruses need cross-border responses, especially as we move into the next phase of this pandemic. The dramatic spikes in recent weeks across the world, and especially here in Europe, reflect a picture that is getting worse by the day. So we are back to March and April levels, and in many cases already far beyond it. But while the virus is back stronger than ever, our knowledge and our experience of what we need to do is also much better than before. And I would like to focus on 3 areas where this will be critical in the next month ahead of us. The first is the need for coordination across borders. At the beginning of the pandemic, unilateral border closures threatened our ability to manage the health crisis and our ability to keep our societies and economies going. In response, we created green lanes to ensure the availability of goods and essential services. But this pointed to the crucial importance of early and effective cross-border cooperation. The virus does not respect any borders. And this is why the Commission last month set out how measures taken by member states should be coordinated and communicated. We now have common criteria and thresholds when deciding whether to introduce travel restrictions. We have a map with a single set of colors where everyone agrees which regions are red, orange or green. And we now need a single set of rules for what testing and quarantine people have to do if they are traveling from a high-risk zone. The second area where we need to draw on our experience is the supply of equipment. In response to shortages at the beginning of the pandemic, Europe took swift action to ensure that industry here in Europe could ramp up the production of masks, of gloves, tests, ventilators, and all the other essential equipment. We created a common European reserve for medical equipment, and through our civil protection mechanism, that's how we call it, we can now ensure that it is distributed to where it is needed most. Like, for example, the 30 ventilators that we are now sending to Czechia. Also, the need to diversify some of our supply chains in critical areas will be a key focus in the weeks and months and years ahead of us. In the meantime, we know that almost every country will take drastic and difficult measures to contain the spread of the virus, rightly so. People are once again being asked to make painful sacrifices. We owe it to them to all pull in the same direction, to protect their lives and their livelihoods. And this is the third area I would like to discuss. We need to ensure that we support people and that we support the economy. And this is why we created SURE. This is a temporary instrument to keep people in work and in the companies, in business. It will be funded by 100 billion euros, issued through social bonds, and it will now start supporting short-time work schemes in at least 16 member states. And in parallel, our recovery plan, we call it Next Generation EU, will finance 750 billion euros of investment and reform to kickstart our economy, to strengthen our health systems, and to accelerate Europe's twin green and digital transition. Ladies and gentlemen, the point is we cannot wait for the end of the pandemic to repair and prepare for the future. And this is why we will be putting forward proposals to improve our ability to collectively respond to serious cross-border health threats. We will strengthen our medicines and scientific agencies, the ECDC and EMA, and we will build a new European agency for biomedical advanced research and development. And we will build the foundation of a stronger European health union in which 27 countries work together to detect, prepare and respond collectively. On the one hand, we have seen the limits of what Europe can do without competence in this area. And we do need to have a real debate on this. Because on the other hand, we have seen the real added value when countries cooperate and coordinate on everything from data to criteria. Only this week, the Commission has set up an EU-wide gateway for national tracing apps to ensure they safely interoperate and interact with each other. So tracing apps from Germany, Ireland and Italy, for example, are now linked to this gateway. And Czechia, Denmark, Latvia, Spain and many others will soon also follow. This will help people who work or travel across borders and ensure we are all pulling together. All pulling together. This must be the hallmark of the European Health Union. And I believe this can be a test case for true global health compact. The need for leadership is clear. And I believe the European Union must assume this responsibility. And this is why I will convene a global health summit next year alongside Prime Minister Conte and the Italian G20 presidency. The aim will be to bring all global efforts together, to learn the lessons of the crisis, and to update global health cooperation for this age of pandemics. We really need to rally around a set of international commitments, investments and principles for the next decade of global health cooperation. And we have been laying the groundwork for this ever since the pandemic started. In April, the European Commission helped launch the ACT Accelerator Initiative, an initiative to globally coordinate and speed up the development and fair allocation of vaccines, treatments and diagnostics. Then in May, we brought more than 40 countries together to raise the necessary 16 billion euros, again for universal access to tests, treatments and vaccines, and to support the economic recovery of the world's most fragile regions and communities. And this was a truly global effort. It was supported by many, for example, Global Citizen, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Wellcome Trust, the WHO, the Global Preparedness Monitoring Board, just to name some. And then in August, the European Commission joined the COVAX facility. It is co-hosted by Gavi and contributed 400 million euros for pooled procurement and equitable distribution of COVID-19 vaccines around the world. But we all know there is way more work to do. And we know that developing a vaccine won't save lives in itself, but vaccinations will. So we need to ensure that those who need them most urgently can get it first, the health workers, the vulnerable, the older generation. The European Commission has been working hard to make agreements with pharmaceutical companies and secure future doses. We must now get ready to deploy it, both in Europe with our recent vaccination strategy and, of course, around the world. And we will not stop once the first vaccinations have been administered, because way more important is that we will centrally collect robust data and robust evidence to assess the impact, the effectiveness and any side effects of these vaccines. National immunization technical advisory groups will, in close cooperation with ECDC and the EMA, play a key role in the coordination of large-scale EU-wide studies that are monitoring the safety and the effectiveness of COVID-19 vaccines. Preparation for these activities must start now. They must start now to be in place when COVID-19 vaccines reach the European market. Ladies and gentlemen, only with trust and with transparency about the process will we overcome any doubts or disinformation. But for the longer term, I believe it is time for the world to change its mindset on health. We need to move away from looking after our health only through clinical individual outcomes. In today's world, we need to look after our health by looking after our planet, our well-being, and our sustainable development. And we need to do it together through global health cooperation and not through global health competition. And this is the aim of this conference. And this is what you can count on Europe for in the difficult period ahead and in the decade that follows. Thank you so much.